Get ready for a heart-pounding ride as Morgan, a seemingly ordinary truck driver, faces off against a ruthless biker gang on a lonely desert highway. The most thrilling moment? When she outsmarts these outlaws in a daring nighttime chase, using her Delta Force instincts to survive against overwhelming odds. How does she manage to turn the tables on criminals who've cornered countless victims before? You'll have to follow the entire story to see if her courage and tactical genius can triumph over danger. If you love stories packed with suspense, hidden identities, and heroic showdowns, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps bring more exciting tales to life. Stay tuned. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the dusty parking lot of Rosie's roadside diner. It was a humble establishment smack in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by endless miles of desert plains. Tall, scraggly sagebrush lined the gravel parking area, and an old neon sign flickered sporadically, revealing the diner's name in shaky orange lights. Parked near the entrance was a massive 18-wheeler with a weathered cab, its paint job chipped after countless miles of rough roads. Beyond that, an ancient pickup truck with rust curling at its wheel arches sat quietly, as though it had been there for decades. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, appearing deceptively serene. Only the occasional tumbleweed and the distant hum of a passing vehicle hinted that life still passed through this forgotten corner of the state. Inside the diner, the evening rush was winding down. A group of farmers with sun-baked faces chatted in hushed tones at a booth, sharing news of fluctuating crop prices. The smell of frying bacon and freshly brewed coffee swirled in the air. Rosie, the stout diner owner with a warm smile, hovered behind the counter while her young niece, Chloe, balanced plates laden with fries and burgers for the few remaining customers. At a corner table sat a woman in her early 30s, wearing a faded plaid shirt and sturdy jeans. Her boots were scuffed from heavy use, and a trucker's cap sat low over her straight, dark hair. She was unassuming at first glance, neither too tall nor exceptionally muscular, but there was a certain air of controlled strength about her. The lines around her eyes hinted she'd witnessed more of the world than most folks in this quiet region ever would. Her name was Morgan Mitchell. She drove the long-haul rig outside, the battered behemoth sporting a Colorado license plate. Rosie's Diner was a familiar pit stop during her cross-state deliveries. For the locals, she was just a hard-working lady trucker with a serious face and polite manners. Few knew she had once served in an elite unit. She had never been the type to boast about her background. In fact, she avoided the topic entirely. A keen observer, however, might notice subtle signs that betrayed her advanced training. How she scanned the room automatically, sizing up edges and corners, or the way her posture remained alert even while seated. Morgan sipped her coffee, flicking her gaze to the small TV mounted in the corner. The local news channel aired a report about a recent series of robberies on remote highways. Grainy surveillance footage showed a gang of armed bikers harassing a service station. Their leader, a tall figure with a full beard and a menacing stare, seemed to relish the chaos. The news anchor's voice trembled slightly as he recounted unconfirmed rumors linking the gang to other violent incidents across the region. Morgan set down her cup. A slight crease formed on her brow. She'd heard whispers of trouble stirring along the highways, reports of hijackings, extortion, and intimidation. But the reality struck harder when she saw it on the news. She couldn't help but feel an old instinct stir, a quiet sense of duty that she had tried to leave behind. With a brief sigh, she tucked those thoughts away. She was just a trucker now, she reminded herself, just here for a quick stop before hitting the road again. "Are you heading out soon, Morgan?" Rosie's voice broke the quiet. The middle-aged diner owner slid another cup of steaming coffee onto Morgan's table, an unspoken gesture of hospitality. Morgan glanced up and offered a tight-lipped smile. "Yeah, got a schedule to keep, you know how it is." She took a cautious show and let the warmth spread through her. Rosie folded her arms across her apron. "You be careful out there, all right? I've been hearing some nasty rumors. Folks say a biker gang's been causing havoc on the roads west of here." Morgan felt an odd prickle at the nape of her neck. "I'll watch my back," she promised, her expression calm yet resolute. She took the warning seriously. Rosie was no alarmist. If she voiced concern, it meant there was tangible risk. Across the room, Chloe resumed clearing tables and refilling water glasses. The girl, barely out of her teens, cast a curious glance at Morgan. She found the trucker's quiet confidence intriguing, as did many in the diner. Morgan had a way of moving that seemed almost too deliberate, like a cat stalking invisible prey. Just then, the bell over the door jingled. Two men stepped inside, their heavy boots thudding on the linoleum floor. Their leather jackets bore a menacing insignia, a stylized skull flanked by raging flames. They took a seat near the counter, ignoring everyone else. One of them flicked a gaze around the room, eyes lingering briefly on Morgan. She pretended not to notice, though she could sense the tension radiating from them. Rosie approached with forced cheer. "What can I get for you, gentlemen?" "Coffee," one grunted. "Black." They exchanged a few low words, something about a job that needed finishing soon. Morgan picked up fragments. "The boss wants it done, and no stragglers." The man spoke in a gravelly whisper, but in the sparse diner his voice carried. Morgan kept her eyes on her coffee. She'd learned long ago that the best way to gather information was to blend into the background. Yet she couldn't help noticing the clench of one man's jaw, the way his foot tapped restlessly against the floor. This was more than just casual talk about daily errands. Rosie returned with 2 cups of coffee, wearing a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The men took their cups without a word of thanks. The older of the two, sporting a greasy ponytail, shot Morgan another glance. Then, with a dismissive grunt, he went back to huddled conversation. Morgan exhaled soundlessly. Her mind was already spinning possibilities. If this gang was indeed behind the reported robberies, their presence here might mean trouble was headed in her direction. She had hoped to remain under the radar, delivering goods and avoiding conflicts. But life had a habit of thrusting her old skills back into play whenever she least expected it. She closed her eyes for a moment, reminding herself she was no longer in the Delta Force. No longer that specialized operative trained to handle perilous missions. Still, that discipline remained part of her, as innate as breathing. For now, she decided she would simply observe and be ready. Once the two men had finished their coffee, they stomped out of the diner without even a backwards glance. Their powerful bikes, caked in dust, roared to life outside. Rosie and the farmers watched anxiously from behind the diner's windows as the riders sped off into the gathering dusk. A thin plume of exhaust smoke lingered, then dissolved into the twilight. Morgan glanced at this time on her phone. She too needed to get back on the road. She had a deadline to meet, a shipment of non-perishable goods and medical supplies destined for a small reservation clinic about 200 miles west. It was a route she'd driven before, though never under the shadow of a potential threat. She dug into her wallet, fishing out enough bills to cover her meal plus a generous tip for Rosie and Chloe. "You take care now," Rosie said, her tone laced with genuine concern. Morgan nodded, hefting her travel-worn duffel over her shoulder. "Will do. Thanks for everything." She slipped out the door, the evening air unexpectedly cool against her skin. The blazing orange sky had given way to a velvet purple, stars just beginning to emerge above the diner's flickering sign. Her truck loomed ahead, a comforting presence in its familiarity. Morgan ran a quick inspection, checking the tires, the cargo locks, and the overall condition of the rig. Despite the battered exterior, she took pride in maintaining every mechanical aspect. Old habits of thoroughness and readiness, drilled into her in the military, died hard. As she climbed into the driver's seat, she paused, scanning the horizon. The two bikers had disappeared into the dusty distance, but a nagging concern kept her senses on high alert. Putting the truck into gear, she pulled out onto the lonely highway, the rhythmic rumble of the engine resonating through her bones. For the first hour, the drive was uneventful. Morgan kept an eye on the rearview mirrors, half expecting the roar of motorcycle engines. But the road remained empty. The desert, bathed in moonlight, revealed scrub bushes and pale rock formations that glowed like ghosts. Her mind drifted back to her Delta Force days. Those missions in hostile territory, the sharp taste of adrenaline before a breach, the echoing crack of gunfire in the night. She had left that life behind, carrying only the memories and a few scars, some visible, some etched deeper in her psyche. A signpost flashed by, indicating a scenic overlook a few miles ahead. Morgan decided to pull over there for a quick break, maybe check in with dispatch to confirm her eat. The vantage point would allow her to see if any vehicles approached on the highway. When she rolled into the deserted rest area, the glow of her headlights swept across a picnic table, a trash bin, and a single payphone. She parked near the edge overlooking a vast canyon below. The wind whistled softly and the night sky stretched unbroken, glittering with stars. Morgan reached for her phone, no signal. Typical out here. She'd use the old payphone or try her satellite communicator in the rig's sleeper cab if needed. For now, she just wanted a moment of quiet. Yet in the back of her mind, she still felt the presence of danger, like a distant drumbeat she couldn't quite ignore. Morgan locked the truck and wandered over to the railing that protected visitors from the precipitous drop of the canyon. The moon illuminated jagged rock walls below, and far off, she could hear the faint rush of a river carving its path through ancient stone. It was strangely peaceful, a stark contrast to the tension in her mind. Her thoughts turned to the news broadcast she'd seen in Rosie's diner. The gang's leader had a hardened face that hinted at cruelty. Reports said they'd blocked roads, robbed trucks, and even assaulted drivers who resisted. Morgan wondered what they gained from targeting vehicles like hers. Sometimes the cargo was valuable, sometimes not. But in areas as remote as this, a well-armed group could hold travelers hostage to fear, extorting them under threat of violence. She inhaled deeply, letting the crisp night air fill her lungs. A Delta Force mindset told her to gather information, to plan for contingencies. She hated to admit she was checking for vantage points, evaluating potential cover. It was second nature, something she hadn't needed to do in a while. But the presence of those bikers near Rosie's had rattled her just enough. Resigning herself to the practicality of her training, Morgan turned back to the rig to fish out a satellite phone. She wanted to give her dispatcher, Carl, a quick update on her progress, just so someone knew where she was. But as she opened the driver's side door, headlights washed over her from the highway. A single motorcycle approached, its engine throbbing loudly in the stillness. Morgan froze, tension gripping her. She recognized the black leather jacket and the skull emblem glinting in the bike's headlights. One of the men from the diner. The rider slowed as he neared the rest area, then cut the engine, letting the machine coast to a stop. Morgan felt her pulse quicken. Did he come alone, or were others lurking in the darkness? She scanned the stretch of highway but saw no other headlights. The man dismounted and took a few steps toward her. "Nice evening for a drive," he drawled, voice echoing slightly in the quiet. Morgan forced a polite nod. "Sure is." He glanced at her truck, then shifted his gaze back to her. "Making a delivery somewhere?" She shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Just passing through." The biker scoffed lightly. "Saw you at Rosie's. Figured I'd see which way you were headed." An icy knot formed in Morgan's stomach. She couldn't afford to show fear. "You riding alone?" she asked, flipping the question on him. He smirked. "We all got places to be." Morgan's instincts screamed that this was a test, some sort of attempt to gauge her vulnerability. She kept her posture neutral but poised for action. "Travel safe," the biker finally said, returning to his motorcycle. He revved the engine, shooting her a final cryptic look before speeding off into the darkness. Morgan stood there, the night wind tugging at her hair, her breath coming in slow, measured pulls. Whatever the biker's purpose had been, she doubted it was friendly. As the echo of his engine faded, she resolved to push onward. This was no time to hesitate. Returning to the truck's cab, Morgan let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She quickly fired up her satellite phone, punching in the number for Carl, her dispatcher. The line crackled once, twice, before a familiar gravelly voice answered. "Carl here?" "It's Morgan," she said, keeping her tone low. "I'm at the scenic overlook, about 100 miles out from the reservation." "Everything okay?" Carl asked, sounding concerned. They had an unspoken rapport built over years of working together. He knew Morgan rarely called unless something significant was going on. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just wanted to let you know I'll be running a bit behind schedule." A static-laced pause. "Gotta watch out on those roads. Been hearing about some bad characters out that way." Morgan bit her lip. "Yeah, I've come across a few. I'll proceed with caution. Tell the clinic I might arrive a couple hours later than planned." "Understood," Carl replied. "Keep me posted if anything changes." She ended the call and slid the phone into her jacket pocket, a sense of reassurance warming her chest. At least someone knew where she was now. If something went wrong, Carl would raise the alarm. Morgan climbed back into the driver's seat, flicking on the headlights and double-checking her mirrors. The night pressed in from all sides, turning the road into a solitary ribbon of asphalt. She gripped the wheel firmly, the roar of the engine filling her ears as she accelerated back onto the highway. Darkness enveloped the landscape, And for a while, her mind wandered to simpler times. Childhood fishing trips with her father, the smell of campfire smoke, the hush of dawn in the mountains. Memories like these kept her grounded, reminding her why she'd left the service for a quieter life on the open road. An hour passed, maybe more. The hum of the truck's engine became a steady companion. Occasionally, distant lights would appear, the headlights of an oncoming vehicle. Each time, Morgan tensed, only to relax when it turned out to be just another trucker or a lone car heading in the opposite direction. No sign of the biker or his friends. She considered pulling into another rest stop to catch a few hours of sleep, but a nagging instinct told her to keep moving. Something about the encounter with that rider unsettled her. If he'd followed her once, he might do so again, and she wanted to get as far as possible before dawn. At last, she reached a long, straight stretch of highway flanked by rocky outcroppings. She recognized the area from previous runs, one of the more isolated sections with hardly any phone reception. It would be a perfect spot for an ambush if someone were so inclined. Her eyes flicked to the side mirror. In the faint glow, she thought she glimpsed lights behind her, but they vanished just as quickly. She couldn't be certain if it was a trick of her imagination or actual headlights ducking behind hills. Morgan pressed on the butch a bit more, heart thumping louder than the engine. She wasn't one to spook easily, but this quiet, deserted road now felt like a stage where the next act was about to unfold. She just hoped she was wrong about who might be lurking in the wings. An uneasy stillness crept into the truck's cab, broken only by the rhythmic rumble of tires on asphalt. Morgan's gaze darted between the mirrors and the looming darkness ahead. She mentally revisited her training, recalling protocols for convoy security and ambush evasion, techniques she hadn't needed in years. Off to the side, a battered sign announcing "Next gas 50 miles" flickered by under the headlights. The clinic was still a good distance away and the route cut through rugged terrain. Morgan checked her fuel gauge. She had enough to reach the next station, but she'd have little room for detours. On a whim, she reached under the passenger seat for a small lockbox. Inside lay her personal firearm, a semi-automatic pistol. She'd obtained all the necessary permits for it once she became a trucker. Many drivers carried for self-defense, especially in remote areas. Morgan disliked relying on weapons, preferring to de-escalate whenever possible. But given the circumstances, it felt prudent to keep the pistol within arm's reach. She flicked her headlights to high beam, scanning the road's edges for any sign of movement. The rocky shoulders on either side were like fortress walls, hugging the narrow two-lane stretch. The truck's massive engine growled as she pressed onward. Suddenly, headlights blazed in her mirrors, startling her. A vehicle was rapidly approaching from behind, hugging the center line. Morgan's pulse quickened. She readied herself, not knowing if it was just another motorist or the threat she'd been anticipating. As the vehicle drew closer, she realized it was not a bike, but a truck. An old pickup, the same rusted one she vaguely recalled parked outside Rosie's diner earlier. The occupant must have left after her, or perhaps there were multiple vehicles involved in whatever this was. Morgan gripped the steering wheel tighter, her throat dry. The pickup accelerated aggressively, swerving as though to pass. But instead of overtaking her rig, the driver lingered in her blind spot. "That's not good," she muttered under her breath. Her heart thumped heavily in her chest as she considered her options. She eased off the accelerator, hoping to create some distance. The pickup driver mirrored her actions, maintaining the uncomfortable position in the adjacent lane. Morgan's training told her to stay calm, keep control of the situation. She resisted the urge to speed up wildly or slow down too much. She wanted to see if the driver would make a move, like cutting her off or attempting to force her to stop. Then, in abrupt motion, the pickup swerved inward, its lights shining directly through Morgan's window. The sudden maneuver made her flinch. She countersteered, keeping her rig steady. The pickup kept pace, almost grinding against the side of her trailer. Unbidden, the memory of a high-speed chase in a faraway war zone surfaced in her mind, dodging roadside threats, listening to the frantic shouts of her teammates over the radio. She banished the flashback, focusing on the here and now. "Back off," she hissed. She flicked her headlights and laid on the horn, a loud blast shattering the desert silence. But the pickup persisted, matching her every move, as though corralling her toward the shoulder. She was under no illusion. This was a deliberate attack, and with nothing but open desert for miles, Morgan was on her own. Morgan's eyes darted to the road ahead. She spotted a narrow shoulder on the right, barely enough space for a truck to stop safely. If the pickup forced her off the pavement, the trailer could jackknife or overturn, leaving her stranded and vulnerable. Her mind raced through possible tactics. Aggressive maneuvers with an 18-wheeler were risky, but letting the pickup dominate her could be even deadlier. With steady hands, Morgan downshifted, letting her engine's brake system slow the rig. The pickup tried to anticipate her move, also decelerating. However, the mass of her loaded trailer gave her an advantage in momentum. In one swift decision, she tapped the accelerator, then jerked the wheel left, shifting just enough that the trailer's rear swung outward. The pickup's driver seemed caught off guard, swerving violently to avoid being clipped by the trailer's corner. Tires screeched, and the smell of burned rubber wafted through Morgan's open window. She used the brief window of confusion to maneuver back into the center of the lane, pressing down on the gas pedal to put some distance between them. Her heart pounded, adrenaline roaring in her ears. The pickup fell behind momentarily, but she could still see its headlights in her mirror, weaving erratically. After a few seconds, it stabilized and began gaining on her once again. A second set of headlights appeared ahead, cresting the hill from the opposite direction. Morgan's stomach knotted. Another vehicle, likely an accomplice. The territory these outlaws commanded was bigger than she'd realized. She needed an exit strategy. Up ahead, the highway curved sharply around a rocky bluff. If she could navigate that turn quickly, the pickup might not be able to follow closely with the same stability. She weighed the dangers. Too fast, and her rig could overturn. Too slow, and she'd lose the lead. Gritting her teeth, Morgan made her choice. She tightened her grip on the wheel, mentally bracing as she approached the bend. The trailer rattled, and she fought the inertia threatening to pull her off the road. Gravel pinged under her tires, but she managed to keep the rig within the lane. Behind her, the pickup's lights swung wildly as it struggled to handle the turn. Morgan heard the scrape of metal on the cliffside and caught a glimpse of sparks in her mirror. A relief flickered through her chest. She had at least bought herself a few more seconds. Yet, as she emerged from the curve, the second set of headlights loomed larger. A black SUV parked on the shoulder, partially blocking the lane. A figure stood beside the vehicle, waving frantically as if signaling for her to stop. Morgan felt a surge of anger. Clearly, this was a planned ambush. They wanted to box her in, pickup behind, SUV in front. She quickly checked the left lane. If no one was coming the other way, she might swerve around the SUV. But in the dark, it was a risky gamble. Her mind jumped back to a training exercise that involved neutralizing roadblocks under night conditions. Delta Force training hammered in the principle of always having a contingency plan, always being ready to adapt. She'd never thought she'd use those lessons on a U.S. highway. The SUV's occupant gestured again, more aggressively this time. Morgan had no intention of complying. She pressed harder on the gas, the truck's engine howling in protest, and aimed for a narrow gap between the SUV and the lane divider. There was no turning back now. Morgan's palms sweated as she navigated the tight space, the side of her trailer narrowly missing the SUV's front bumper. She heard shouting, sharp curses from the roadside figure. The moment her trailer cleared, she glimpsed the masked face of the man, eyes wide with surprise and rage. Then she was past, the rig lurching forward onto open road. But she couldn't celebrate yet. The pickup behind her roared around the bend, battered but still functional, and the SUV's engine gunned to life. They were both in pursuit, headlights converging on her from the rear. She took a moment to recalibrate. The immediate threat was behind her, but that didn't mean they wouldn't try to overtake her again. In the distance, the highway snaked toward a sparse scattering of lights, a small roadside settlement, or perhaps a gas station. If she could make it there, maybe she could find help, or at least a more public area where the outlaws might back off. Her chest felt tight as she pushed the rig to its limits, speedometer climbing above her usual caution zone. She'd only accelerate like this in an absolute emergency. The wind whipped around the cab, and the truck shuddered under the strain of high speed. Behind her, the pickup and the SUV gained ground. It seemed they were well coordinated, moving in tandem, forming a wedge that attempted to close in. Morgan mentally mapped out the next moves. If they got close enough, they might try to shoot out her tires or block the road entirely. In a flash of insight, she remembered that not far ahead lay an old gravel side road, rarely used, leading to a defunct mining site. She'd passed it numerous times on previous runs. Normally, it was a no-go for a large rig because the terrain was rough and unmaintained. But these were hardly normal circumstances. Staying on the main highway offered more direct route to civilization, but that also meant staying predictable. The Outlaws could easily ambush her again if she stuck to the main drag. The side road might offer cover or at least break their line of sight. She made the decision in a heartbeat, scanning for the turnoff. The headlights behind her flared, closing the distance alarmingly fast. Then she saw the battered sign pointing left, half hidden by overgrown brush. Her rig barreled toward the intersection at high speed. Carefully, she decelerated to keep the truck from tipping over. The instant she reached the turnoff, she cranked the wheel, the trailer's tires skidding over loose gravel. The entire rig jolted, and Morgan wrestled to keep control, her shoulders taut with tension. The pursuers couldn't have expected that. The pickup blazed past the intersection on the highway, the driver likely slamming on the brakes too late. The SUV, however, was more reactive. Its taillights glowed as it skidded into the turn, but it slowed noticeably, unsure if it could handle the rough ground. Morgan's wheels churned up clouds of dust as she continued down the gravel road. Rocks clattered against the undercarriage. The truck's suspension groaned in protest, but she pushed forward, adrenaline surging through her veins. All she could think about was finding a defensible position or a chance to lose these thugs entirely. The old mining road was a perilous route, twisting through a desolate expanse of scrubland. Moonlight revealed scattered boulders and deep ruts in the gravel. Morgan wrestled with the steering wheel, her shoulders aching from the strain. Each jolt threatened to send her cargo shifting dangerously in the trailer. Behind her, the SUV's headlights bounced wildly, occasionally disappearing behind hills or outcroppings. The driver was struggling to maintain pursuit on such rough terrain. That gave Morgan a sliver of hope, but it was tempered by the knowledge that these outlaws seemed relentless. A rock outcrop loomed to the left, forming a natural wall. On the right, the ground dropped off into a shallow ravine. With every bump, Morgan worried about losing traction and sliding off the edge. She kept the rig's speed controlled, refusing to let panic dictate her actions. The darkness felt oppressive, but ironically, it was also her ally. If she could extinguish her lights at the right moment, she might hide behind a rocky formation and let the outlaws pass behind. She recalled nighttime evasions in desert settings overseas, using terrain to break line of sight. The principle was the same here. Keep moving unpredictably, find cover, and avoid direct confrontations if possible. She spotted a wide clearing just ahead, partially shielded by a massive boulder. It looked like it might have once been a makeshift parking area or a staging zone for mining equipment. If she maneuvered the rig behind that rock, she could at least take stock of the situation. Morgan downshifted and steered into the clearing, feeling the rig shudder as it rolled off the main track. She killed the headlights and engine, plunging herself into sudden darkness. Her eyes took a moment to adjust, but she could still see the faint glow of the moon reflecting on patches of dust. Heart pounding, she reached for her pistol, flipping off the safety. If the SUV tracked her here, she might have to defend herself. She didn't relish the thought of a firefight, especially with her cargo and in such a confined area. But her training had taught her to act decisively when cornered. Seconds later, she heard the distinct roar of the SUV's engine grinding over loose gravel. Its headlights appeared on the far side of the clearing, scanning across the rocky landscape. She ducked lower, partially concealed by the truck's massive tires. The SUV slowed, as if searching. Morgan's breath came in slow, measured exhales. She braced herself, pistol clutched in both hands. The moment seemed to stretch on forever. Then the headlights swung away. The SUV proceeded along the main track, evidently not spotting her in the darkness. Morgan waited, motionless, until the growl of the engine faded into the distance. Relief pulsed through her like a wave. But she knew this reprieve might be temporary. The outlaws could circle back or send others. Climbing into the cab, Morgan locked the doors and took a moment to think. She needed a plan, somewhere safe to ride out the night or a means to continue her journey without further ambush. For now, she'd remain hidden, relying on her old instincts and the cover of darkness. She was no stranger to waiting, to enduring tense silence. Her Delta Force days had prepared her for that much at least. Time passed slowly in the dark. Morgan checked her watch. Nearly 2 o'clock a.m. She peered through the windshield at the moonlit boulder, half expecting to see the glow of headlights any moment. Nothing stirred except the occasional gust of wind, scattering loose gravel. She knew she couldn't stay here indefinitely. The outlaws might still be close, and the longer she remained in one place, the more vulnerable she became. Yet she also hesitated to return to the main highway. That route was compromised. The gangster who'd pursued her would likely have called for reinforcements by now. Her truck's radio was out of range to pick up any strong signals, and her cell phone had no reception in this remote area. She considered using the satellite phone again, but she doubted Carl could arrange a rescue in the middle of nowhere, especially at this hour. Morgan took a sip of lukewarm water from her thermos, trying to steady her nerves. Then an idea surfaced. There might be an alternate path leading from these old mining roads back toward the highway, farther to the north. It was a longer detour, but it could potentially bypass the region where the gang operated. She recalled hearing about such a route from a fellow trucker who specialized in off-the-beaten-path deliveries. Deciding to move under cover of darkness, Morgan started the engine again, wincing at the sound that shattered the silence. Every noise felt amplified in the still night air. She inched the truck forward, mindful of large rocks, following what appeared to be a faint set of tire tracks that curved around the boulder. Her headlights stayed off. Instead, she relied on the moonlight and her recollection of the terrain. It was slow going, but the advantage was stealth. If the outlaws were nearby, they might not spot her immediately. As she navigated the winding path, she couldn't help but reflect on how quickly her routine job had escalated into a life-threatening ordeal. She'd made hundreds of deliveries through remote areas without incident. The difference this time was a well-organized gang, brazen enough to attempt hijacking a fully loaded 18-wheeler. Her thoughts drifted to the next steps. Even if she made it out safely, what about the gang terrorizing others? These roads serviced many small communities reliant on supply trucks. Morgan felt a surge of anger at the idea that innocent people, farmers, families, or clinic staff, could become victims. Her Delta Force training tugged at her conscience. She had once pledged to protect civilians from threats, foreign or domestic. But she was just a trucker now, right? She had no official mandate to take on criminals. Still, her moral code refused to let the matter slide. The rig lurched over a rut in the gravel, jolting her back to the present. She steadied the steering wheel, forging ahead. If she could reach the main road before sunrise and make the delivery, maybe she could alert the local authorities, or even state troopers, about the gang's activities. Eventually, the dirt track began to widen, merging with what seemed like a better-maintained gravel road. Morgan permitted herself a small sigh of relief. Progress. She flicked her headlights on briefly, just to confirm the path was clear. For a moment, the beams illuminated the jagged desert plants and distant rock formations, giving her a sense of direction. Switching them off again, she continued under moonlight, determined to evade the outlaws and complete her mission. Her life had taken an unexpected turn back toward conflict, but if she had to face it, she would, on her own terms, and with the same resolve that once made her a force to be reckoned with. By the time Morgan emerged onto a paved road again, the eastern sky had begun its subtle transition from black to deep indigo. It wasn't the same highway she'd left. This was a smaller state route that wound through rolling hills and sparse farmland. She consulted an old map she kept in the cab, tracing a route that would lead her north of the outlaw territory. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape began to fade, leaving her tired and sore. She spotted an abandoned gas station ahead, just a single pump in a boarded-up convenience store. It offered no fuel, but perhaps she could pull over and catch a brief rest while making a plan. Morgan parked the rig alongside the building, then performed a quick security check. No signs of recent activity, no footprints, no fresh tire marks. The place looked forgotten by the world. She switched off the engine and stepped out, pistol tucked in her waistband. The dawn air felt biting against her sweat-damp skin. She leaned against the truck's side, gazing at the horizon where the first hints of orange and pink streaked the sky. An echo of her Delta Force training told her to stay vigilant during transitional lighting. Dusk and dawn were prime times for ambush. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and she needed a moment of stillness. Her thoughts drifted to the people depending on her shipment, the remote reservation clinic waiting for vital supplies. Delays could mean patients lacking crucial medication. She had to push on soon, but not before ensuring her plan was solid. She rummaged through the truck's sleeper compartment, retrieving a folded highway atlas. The satellite phone also came out, though she was hesitant to use it unless absolutely necessary. Too many calls might reveal her position if the gang had someone monitoring signals. Then again, that might be an overestimation of their tech capabilities, but better safe than sorry. Spreading the atlas on the passenger seat, she traced a path from her current position. The route she intended to take would add hours to her journey, but if it meant avoiding the gang's stronghold, it was worth it. She only hoped the roads were passable for her rig. Before starting the engine again, she placed a brief call to Carl. He answered on the first ring. "Morgan, where the hell have you been? I've been trying to raise you." She exhaled slowly. "Got into some trouble. Ran into that gang you warned me about." A tense silence. "You okay?" "Yeah, for now. I'm taking a detour north. It's going to put me even further behind schedule." "I'll let the clinic know," Carl said, relieved. "Just keep me updated. If things get any worse, we'll try to send help." Morgan gave a short laugh. "Out here, help might not come fast." "Then keep your head down," Carl advised. Ending the call, she took one last look at the rising sun. Time to move. She climbed back into the driver's seat, started the engine with a roar, and guided the truck onto the lonely road. If the outlaws were searching for her, they'd likely assume she was on the main highway to the west. She hoped this detour would buy her time to complete her delivery and maybe even catch the gang off guard if they tried to hunt her down again. Morgan followed the winding back road as the morning sun brightened the world around her. The landscape shifted from barren desert to gently sloping farmland. She passed a few scattered ranch houses, their yards fenced off, livestock roaming lazily in the early light. Occasionally, she saw signs for fresh eggs or homemade preserves, reminders of the quiet rural life that continued despite the criminal threat lurking not too far away. Her mind replayed the events of the night, the pickup's aggressive maneuvers, the SUV's attempt to block her path, the men's hardened stares. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were more than just petty criminals. Their methods were bold, almost militaristic in precision. It reminded her of armed militias that used intimidation and roadblocks to control territories. Images from her past deployments flashed briefly. Dust-covered convoys crawling through hostile zones, all senses on high alert for sudden attacks. The beep of radio chatter, the metallic stench of spent ammunition, the weight of gear pressing on her shoulders. Morgan grimaced. She thought those days were behind her, replaced by the hum of highway miles. Yet here she was, a truck driver forced to act like a soldier once more. She'd always been skilled at compartmentalizing, at focusing on the mission. Right now, her mission was to safely deliver supplies to the reservation clinic. Another part of her mind, however, couldn't ignore the moral question. What if these outlaws kept preying on innocent travelers? Could she really drive away, deliver her cargo, and wash her hands of the situation? A battered sign announced a junction ahead leading to a small town called Willow Bend. Perhaps she could refuel there, both the truck and herself. She was running on adrenaline and fleeting snatches of rest. And while she dreaded encountering more of the gang, a populated town might offer some measure of safety. She turned onto the main street, which was just a two-lane road lined with older brick buildings and a few shops with wooden facades. The town had an air of fading prosperity, as though the best days were behind it. A lonely gas station stood near the outskirts, its pumps looking as ancient as the rusted sign overhead. Pulling the rig into the station, Morgan parked beside a pump. An elderly man in overalls ambled out, wiping his hands on a rag. "Doyon." He offered a cursory nod, stepping back with a slight twitch of caution when he noticed the battered exterior of her truck. "Morning," she greeted, forcing a small smile. He eyed the truck warily. "Need a fill-up?" She nodded, handing over a credit card. "Yeah, diesel, and if you've got coffee, I could use some." The man nodded and went to start the pump. Morgan stepped inside the station's cramped office, which doubled as a small store selling candy bars, soda, and local crafts. An old radio played country music in the background. As she poured herself a paper cup of black coffee from a stained carafe, she caught snippets of conversation from a small TV in the corner. The local news channel was recapping an incident from the night before, an assault on a truck driver who had been forced off the road. The reporter mentioned a gang of outlaws suspected of multiple hijackings. The footage showed a charred, overturned truck. Morgan felt a chill. It wasn't her vehicle, but it could have been. Her grip on the coffee cup tightened. She paid the man for the fuel and hurried outside. The longer she stayed in one spot, the more vulnerable she felt. She had to keep moving. But a new determination crystallized in her chest. If she encountered those thugs again, she wouldn't let them claim another victim. Morgan set off from Willow Bend with renewed purpose. The fresh diesel in her tank and the caffeine coursing through her veins gave her a temporary energy boost. But the reality was she'd gone almost a full night without proper rest. Still, she pressed on, the hum of the engine a steady backdrop to her racing thoughts. The route she'd planned snaked north around the rumored territories of the outlaw gang, looping back south only after cutting across a scenic stretch of foothills. It added close to 90 miles to her journey, but in theory, it kept her off their radar. She climbed in elevation, the landscape shifting to pine-studded hills and craggy rock faces. The air grew cooler, and patches of morning fog clung to shaded groves. To her relief, the roads here showed minimal traffic. Yet that very isolation was a double-edged sword. If something went wrong, help would be far away. A few hours into the drive, as the sun rose higher, she rounded a bend and caught sight of a roadside turnout, an overlook offering a panoramic view of the valley below. She decided to pull over for a quick break. Stretching her legs, she breathed in the crisp mountain air, a stark contrast to the desert dust of the night before. From the edge of the overlook, she could see a winding river cutting through the valley, lush with greenery. The sight momentarily eased her tension. It was these glimpses of natural beauty that she cherished about truck driving. Out here, you could still find unspoiled pockets of the world, far from the chaos and noise of civilization. Yet that chaos had a way of finding her, no matter how far she roamed. She leaned against the guardrail, mind drifting to the question that gnawed at her. Should she warn the authorities? The local sheriff, highway patrol, someone had to be alerted to the scale of the threat. But without definitive proof or the means to coordinate a response, she might just be risking more trouble. In the distance, a hawk soared on an updraft, its keen eyes scanning the terrain below. Morgan found herself envying its freedom, yet she knew freedom always had a price. She'd paid hers with years of service, carrying memories that never fully left her. Stepping back to the truck, she grabbed her phone to see if any signal bars were present. 2 bars flickered into existence, enough for a quick call. Without overthinking, she dialed the number for the nearest state trooper station she'd memorized from a rest stop flyer. After a few rings, a terse voice answered, "State Trooper Office, Jorgensen speaking." Morgan cleared her throat. "I'd like to report a possible gang of road pirates operating near Highway 14 and the adjacent desert roads. They tried to hijack my truck last night. I escaped, but they seem to be a serious threat." She provided basic details, the approximate location of the ambush, descriptions of the vehicles. The trooper asked for her name and contact, which she supplied cautiously. A wave of relief washed over her once she'd relayed everything. "We'll look into it," the trooper assured. "We've had scattered reports, but it's hard to pin them down. Thanks for your call, ma'am." Hanging up, Morgan knew it might not solve the problem immediately. Still, it was something. She stowed the phone and climbed back behind the wheel. Her route beckoned, the next leg of the journey leading deeper into the foothills. She couldn't afford to linger. There was precious cargo waiting to be delivered. Yet in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the suspicion that her run-in with these outlaws was far from over. Looking back, this whole ordeal reminds me of how one person's determination can protect an entire community. Morgan's journey from a low-profile trucker to a defender of remote highways speaks to the power of courage and resourcefulness in the face of danger. She proved that even the darkest corners of the road can become places of hope when good people stand up against evil. I believe stories like this inspire us to stay vigilant and help one another, because unity and resolve often make the difference between surrender and victory. What do you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts on Morgan's transformation and the showdown with the gang. Feel free to leave a comment, share your opinions, and let's keep the conversation going.